Well, I'm a lapsed college professor, so I need my lecture notes. So forgive me. Greetings, I'm Rajiv Sanyal, Interim Dean of the School of Business. I'm delighted to welcome you to this program, which we are co-hosting with our fellow School of STEM. This event is part of our Business of Science lecture series, an opportunity to foster interdisciplinary learning and innovation. We are truly honored to have Dr. Radia Perlman, who is widely celebrated as the mother of the internet, with us today. Radia is a fellow at Dell Technologies and a pioneering figure in network routing and security protocols. She designed the IS intermediate system, IS link state routing protocol, which remains widely used today, and transformed Ethernet networking with her spanning tree bridging design. Radia has also made significant contributions to network security, including designing systems resilient to malicious attacks. She has authored influential textbooks, numerous prestigious awards she has received, holds a PhD from MIT, and taught at universities such as MIT, Harvard, and the University of Washington. This evening, Dr. Perlman will be engaged in a conversation with Dr. Jennifer McLeod-Mann, Dean of the School of STEM. With a PhD in mathematics from the University of Arkansas, Jennifer is deeply committed to advancing student success, fostering community, and creating opportunities for underrepresented groups in STEM, especially as a first-generation Native woman from an economically disadvantaged background. This is how the evening will unfold. Radia and Jennifer will be talking on a range of inspiring and thought-provoking subjects. We will be listening with rapt attention. 40 minutes into it, Radia will take questions from the audience. I will coordinate that. And then I'll conclude the program and move to the collaboratory for a reception. Please join us there. And what's an event without a quiz to kick things off? Here it is. Why did the network administrator break up with the router? Anyone?
That should be fun.
Okay, maybe Irina has the answer. Irina, why did the network administrator break up with the router? Okay, this is AI created. Because it just couldn't connect anymore. With that, Jennifer, please take over. Please welcome our guest and our conversation.
Thank you, Rajiv. I don't think I'm going to be quite as funny, but hopefully this will be an interesting conversation. We are so excited to welcome you, Radia, to campus. The mother of the internet has been sprinkled about, in all of the advertisements, and so we are just looking forward to the conversation today. So I'm going to get started with some questions. The first one is, while many people recognize you for your contributions to computer science, I happen to notice, being a fellow mathematician, that you earned your bachelor's and master's degree in mathematics. And selfishly, I want to ask you, can you share a little bit about your love of mathematics?
Okay, so it's not like I really specifically used most of my math courses, but I'm glad that I got a math degree before. When I went back to grad school, I went in computer science. Math teaches you to think cleanly. So when I went back in computer science, I sort of thought it would be a good idea to force myself to take some computer science classes because I was in the computer industry and hadn't done that. And the professors would wax rhapsodic about something like object-oriented programming. And I'd say, what is that? And it was just shocking. It was like, nobody asks that. It's just everybody knows. Well, I don't know. And they couldn't define it really. It's like a paradigm or something. And when I finally kind of figured out what they were talking about, I was saying, you mean it's a good idea to have a subroutine library of well-defined routines with well-defined inputs and outputs? I knew that already, so what is this thing? And these days, zero trust, is like this buzzword that doesn't mean anything. But with math, you can fly in from Mars and say, what's the number? And the professor won't blink, he'll give you a nice, clean answer. So I think that a math background is really good, not so that you necessarily can, know the specifics of any math course, but just so that you understand, thinking cleanly is all I can say.
I love that answer, by the way. Tell us, were you always interested in computers, or did that interest come later?
Okay, so I really had no idea what a computer was. There's this stereotype that a true engineer just always took things apart. I never did. It never occurred to me to do that. I would have assumed I would break the thing or get electrocuted or something. I was always good at school. Book learning. I could, and I liked logic problems and stuff. As you all were, I'm sure, I was the best student in all the science math courses, and I wasn't even happy about it. It was, okay, we're taking chemistry next year, and I know I'll be the best student. But I had a fantasy that some boy would do better than me at some math or science thing, and my plan was to fall in love with him and marry him. But the reason that's relevant is that given that I just kind of knew I would do well at any class, in high school, a teacher noticed that there was a computer programming class at a nearby college, and she could sign a few of us up for it, drive us over there, wait for the class to be over, and drive us home. Teachers are just awesome, because she was not paid to do that. So I walk into this class, and the students are all bragging about how they had built ham radios when they were 7. I had no idea what a ham radio was. And then they were asking questions with fancy words like input. I had no idea what that was. And so for the first time, my mind completely shut down. I just assumed I was so many years behind these people that I would never catch up. So for the first time in my life, I got nothing out of the class. But that was fine because it didn't affect my grade or anything in school. But at that point, if you asked me what I was interested in, I'd say, oh, pretty much anything as long as it doesn't involve computers. And then I was taking a physics class in college, and the TA said to me, I need a programmer for a project. Would you be willing to be my programmer? And I said, I don't know how to program. And he said, yes, exactly, I know. That's why I'm asking you, because I have no money to pay you. And if you knew how to program, you'd expect to be paid. And to be brutally honest, the reason I agreed to do that is that at the time I had a boyfriend who knew how to program. And I figured, he could teach me or do it himself if necessary. But in that nice, safe place, I realized, oh, programming is actually kind of fun. And I was fine at it. I wasn't, I was competent at programming. It wasn't, I didn't love writing code. So I'm thrilled that I managed to find an ecological niche where I just kind of specify the algorithms and other people fight with the compilers and stuff. So yeah, and I still hate computers. That's actually kind of one of my superpowers. So I have like 2 superpowers. One is that I have a tiny memory. So in order to understand something, I have to get rid of all of the irrelevant details and get to the conceptual heart of the problem. Whereas there's other people who've like lived in a specification and they're so ingrained in the details they sort of can't focus on what the real problem is. Once you get to the conceptual heart, you can find a very simple solution that works all the time. So that's one thing, is having a very tiny memory. And the other thing is that I hate computers. So I design things for people like me, that you should just plug it together and it should work. A doctor in a hospital should know how to like cut people up, but shouldn't have to know how to configure the Cisco router when the network is, yeah. So anyway.
I love hearing about that, just getting to the heart of the problem. Definitely sounds like mathematical thinking. I have a bit of a bias for that. But thinking about just going on in your education, and you definitely got interested in computer science. You earned a PhD, but you told me that there were some bumps along the way, and you actually at one point decided that you were going to leave graduate school, but then you came back. Could you tell us a little bit about why you came back? What motivated that?
Right, so I was in graduate school right after undergraduate, like you would expect, in math, and I knew how to take classes. So I had done everything that I needed except for a thesis. And the MIT math department was very unhelpful. You had to find your own advisor. And I was shy and insecure. And so at that point, I would knock on professors. My perception was that everybody else had gotten into graduate school because they were smart. And I had just gotten into graduate school because I studied really hard. I couldn't imagine doing original research, just some other species did that. So I would knock on doors and say, I need an advisor, and everyone that I knocked on their door said, well, I'm a big, important, busy person, which was, so I'd slink out of the office. I'm so sorry I bothered you. By the way, I think professors ought to love teaching. What on earth are they doing if they don't love students? But whatever. So right around then, an old friend said, are you enjoying grad school? And I said, no, I'm floundering. I have no idea how to get started on a thesis. He said, oh, come join our group. And that was at the dawn of networking. And it was at a little company doing defense contracting, the packet radio network, and I was doing routing algorithms. And I discovered I love distributed algorithms where everyone is doing their own little piece based on local information, and somehow it fits together like a magnificent symphony. And then after a couple years of that, I fell into the ideal job at the right time in history, which was at Digital Equipment Corporation, designing routing. And it wasn't like I had to fight with standards bodies. It was like I was the only one doing it. Whatever I would design, that's what got implemented. And that was just really wonderful. So that's sort of how I got into it. Had the old friend been in chemical engineering or something, I might have wound up in a career in chemical engineering. But I do really, I find this stuff really fascinating. Yeah.
So you've already started to switch gears a little bit, talking about the technical sort of stuff. I'd like to, I have no idea what in the world is routing and bridging, and can you explain any of that to us?
I can. I just realized I probably should finish the other thing, which is how I wound up back in grad school. So I was at Digital, and I had babies, and I had the world's worst cold. So wherever I went, I had to carry a waste paper basket and a large box of tissues, just constantly blowing my nose, incredibly disgusting. And I would stay home for a couple of days, feel a little bit better, go back to work, and I would just get sick again. So I eventually went to a doctor, which I never do, and I said, look, I know I'm not getting enough sleep and I'm doing too much. None of that's going to change. Just give me some sort of drugs to help me get over this cold. And he said, well, how long have you had it? And I said, oh, I don't know, maybe 4 years. And he said, yeah, that's not a cold, that's allergies. And with a bit of thought, I realized it was cigarette smoke, which I had never been exposed to before. And back then, people could sit at their desk and chain smoke all day. So I mentioned this to HR, and they said, oh, they'll make sure nobody in any cubicle next to mine is a smoker. But what's your problem, lady? Only a third of our employees smoke. So then I was telling my friends, I'm going to have to quit. It's just exhausting being sick all the time. And they said, don't worry, digital is aware of the smoking issue and they're working on it. Well, back then, digital had this amazing program where they would fund 2 years of graduate school, all expenses paid, full salary, no strings attached. So I figured, okay, I'll go hide out in graduate school and let them work on the smoking issue. So, so indeed, I had the world's best thesis topics, which just sounded hard and turned out to be easy. So without any problem, I finished in 2 years, and I came back to digital with my PhD, and they had solved the smoking problem by issuing a memo that said, quote, don't smoke in the building, unquote. I have no idea why that took 2 years, but thank you, Philip Morris, for my PhD. But in terms of bridging and routing, so a network consists of links, and a link is where people on the link can talk to each other directly, but then you have these boxes that forward packets from one link to another, and they have to figure out an entire path across the internet from one place to another. So that box could either be called a bridge or a switch or a router. And some people might say, oh, excuse me, a bridge is layer 2 and a router is layer 3. And I would say, layer 3 is the thing that's supposed to forward from link to link to link. So these days, Ethernet is a layer 3 protocol because it's moving from link to link. It's not a very good layer 3 protocol, but it's due to a bunch of accidents in history. Oh yeah, that's another thing. When people try to understand networking, I can't understand how they can figure it out because no one would have designed the mess that we have today. It's all sort of right, and it's due to mistakes and kludges to make up for those mistakes, and the only way to kind of understand it is with history. So I sort of disagree with teaching networking as if TCP/IP arrived on tablets from the sky in its awesome perfection, and you just have to memorize what's there. So hopefully I've kind of explained the story of why I had to do spanning tree is also sort of interesting. Do we have time?
Absolutely.
Okay. So back then, I was doing layer 3, which was the thing where these routers would talk amongst themselves to be able to figure out for themselves which port they should forward things to for each destination. And then along came the Ethernet with great fanfare. And so everyone got all excited. Ethernet is the new way of doing networking. And I said, excuse me, no, it's just a link. You still need layer 3. Because they said, we don't need layer 3 anymore. We'll just build our applications on Ethernet. And I said, oh, you still need layer 3. And they said, oh, Radia, go away. You're just upset because no one needs your stuff anymore. And I said, but you may want to talk from one Ethernet to another. And they said, our customers would never want to do that. So years later, after that group that did their application on top of Ethernet, they made lots of money for the company because it was a good application, but it would have been just as good had they done it correctly, which was with layer 3. So years later, when I was in a bad mood about the whole thing, my manager called me in and said, Radia, we need to design a magic box that will sit between two Ethernets and let someone over here talk to someone over there, which is what my whole career had been. But the constraint was we've already deployed all these things that don't have layer 3 in it, so you can't use like a router. And there are no spare fields in the Ethernet header, and there's a hard size limit. So to continue that story, he thought it was going to be really hard. And so he was saying, make it 0 configuration and no topological restrictions, just plug it together any which way. They already knew that, okay, you just listen promiscuously, meaning you listen for every packet on every port, and when the ether is free or you get the token, you can forward onto the other ports. But that if there's any loops, there's no hop count, it just would be a disaster. So he wanted me to come up with something that would break all the loops. And he said, and just to make, with no configuration, just to make it more challenging, make it scale as a constant. So no matter how many bridges and links there are in the world, the amount of memory necessary to run it should be a constant, which is ridiculous. Nothing's a constant, linear at least. So then he was gone on vacation the following week, and this was before email or cell phones, so he was unreachable. And that night I realized, oh my goodness, it's trivial. I know just how to do it. I can prove it works. And it was such a trivial algorithm that by Tuesday I had finished the spec, and it was in enough detail that when they decided to implement it, it just took them a few weeks without asking me a single question. So this was Tuesday afternoon, and the spec was done, and I couldn't concentrate on anything else because I had to show off to my manager, who was not reachable. So I spent the remainder of the week working on the poem that was the abstract of the paper in which I published the algorithm. And so I officially spent more time on the poem than I did on inventing the algorithm and writing the spec. So the poem is called Algorhyme, because every algorithm should have an algorhyme. And the poem is, I think that I shall never see a graph more lovely than a tree whose crucial property is loop-free connectivity, a tree which must be sure to span so packets can reach every LAN. First, the root must be selected. By ID, it is elected. Least cost paths from root are traced. In the tree, these paths are placed. A mesh is made by folks like me, then bridges find a spanning tree.
That is really that's awesome.
It is.
So I've been curious, this nickname, Mother of the Internet. How did that come about?
Right, I would not have suggested it or approved or whatever. No one person can claim, to have invented the internet. So someone who was doing an article on me decided it would be cute to call me that. And I never get to see the articles before they're published. I seldom even see them afterwards. So, well, another thread to the story is I'm a child of the 70s, and so I have all these radical beliefs. I don't believe in marriage, for instance. So I think the only legitimate reason for two adults to live together is because they both want to. So anyway, both my kids got married, whatever, that's okay. So given that, my daughter was in college when this particular article came out where they decided to call me mother of the internet. So I didn't know about it, and she knew about it because one of her friends showed it to her. So she calls me up and she says, "Mommy, do you have yet another bastard child you never told me about?" That's how I found out about the article.
Well, Radia, you've made incredible accomplishments throughout your life and career. What do you think causes you to be good at what you do?
Yeah, well, it's sort of, as I said, being able to look to get the conceptual heart of a problem and also making things really usable. So like with the bridges, one of the people at Digital said, "Hey, you know, some of our customers are annoyed at the bridge because it's the most boring product Digital has ever made. You just plug it in and never have to think about it again." And they really like to configure things. So I said, fine, if they want knobs, I'll put in knobs, but you don't have to touch the knobs. And even if you do, any setting of the knobs will still work. So, and an example of that is something that I didn't think was profound enough to write a paper or whatever. There's this concept that I was never able to explain to my otherwise bright college-age son, which is that there's no such thing as a reliable "I am dead now" message. So you have to periodically call your mother. And then there's an opportunity for a parameter mismatch, which is how often you call your mother versus how long she waits before panicking and calling the police. So in my routing protocol, to make sure connectivity still exists between you and your neighbor, you send what I call the hello message, where I say, "Hello, I'm Radia, expect to hear from me every 30 seconds. And they multiply it by 3 or so and wait that long before declaring the link down. Now, standards bodies are very much, we want to claim we did it. So the protocol that I did got adopted by ISO, and they called it, unfortunately, ISIS. And like around 6 years ago, Trump said that Hillary and Obama invented ISIS. And some of my friends noticed the headline and forwarded it to me saying, "Shouldn't you get some credit?" But at any rate, so the IETF, kind of doing the internet protocols, liked ISIS, but they wanted to do their own thing. So they basically copied it and called it OSPF and made it like much more complicated for no good reason. And then they got some things wrong. So one example was that they noticed in the hello message, where you report how often you send hellos, what they said in their spec was when you receive a hello from your neighbor saying, "Hi, I send hellos every 30 seconds, you compare it with your configured hello message, and if it's not identical, you refuse to talk," which makes the network extremely brittle. Why shouldn't they have 2 different values? And if you had a value that worked, how do you switch it to a different value without completely breaking the network? So I've kind of made fun of them for this for so long. I said, "Why don't you switch it?" And they say they think their way is simpler or whatever, but it was mostly they couldn't admit that it was done, with a mistake. So let's see, I've lost the thread of what the question was.
What makes you good at what you do?
Oh, right, okay, so there's one other thing I was going to tell with that, which is that a lot of times I see people saying, "Ooh, blockchain, I want to use blockchain. What can I use blockchain for?" And I say, no, start with what problem are you trying to solve? Look at a bunch of different ways of doing it, and if blockchain happens to be the best way of doing it, then fine, but I don't believe there ever will be a case of that, but it doesn't matter as long as you've considered alternatives. So in my book on bridging and routing, I have these boxes occasionally that I call real-world examples to illustrate a point I'm trying to make. So for scalability, I talk about the wine glass clicking protocol, which works fine for like 5 people, but if you have 11 people and everyone has to click everyone else's glass, it gets to be kind of a scalability problem. Well, the one that's absolutely everybody's favorite in the book, and it's 100% true, it's to illustrate that you should know what problem you're solving before you try to solve it, which is a real problem in the industry. Some people get really eager and they sort of half understand what it is. They start writing code, it doesn't solve everything, so they have to like add extra stuff and they come up with this monstrosity. So the anecdote that will forever cement in your mind that you should know what problem you're solving before you try to solve it is that when my son was 3, he ran up to me crying, holding up his hand, saying, my hand, my hand. So I took it and I kissed it a few times. What's the matter, honey? Did you hurt it? And he said, no, I got pee on it.
I think that you should definitely know what problem you're trying to solve after that story. I just, I've been listening to some of your responses to these questions, and the mathematical mind just seeps out of you, Radia. It does. And so many things that I've said myself and I've heard other mathematicians say is pretty interesting to me. So my next question is, as a fellow woman in STEM, I'm curious about how it's been for you throughout your college and industry experiences where you found yourself surrounded mostly by men.
Yeah, I kind of don't notice it. So if you have a dog, he doesn't realize he's different from the rest of the family. And from the time I went to MIT, I guess my first year I was in the women's dorm. And then the second year they said all the dorms would be co-ed except for the women's dorm. So I thought that sounded like fun. And even though I was a math major, I didn't kind of do the math. There were so many dorms, and there was like 50 females in a class of 1,000. So it wasn't like the dorms were really co-ed. It was more like I was the resident female. And I don't know what the other females were majoring in, but it sure wasn't math. So I sort of never saw women again. It just seemed perfectly natural to me. Occasionally I'd be in a big lecture hall and there would be another woman in the class, and I just would notice that they looked kind of odd. You know, they were wearing different clothes and they were a different shape or something. But it didn't occur to me that in every class I was in, there was at least one woman there. But yeah, so mostly I kind of don't notice it. Now, diversity is important, but it's not different body shapes and skin colors. It's different ways of looking at the world. So you don't want everybody to be like me that sort of tries to get to the concepts and you want some people that are willing to kind of implement it, some people that are willing to string cables through the ceiling and stuff like that. So that's the kind of diversity that really is important. The other thing, when there's too much emphasis on this, then there's the misconception that all you have to do is be, for instance, female and walk up to any high-tech company and say, hire me. And they go, why should we hire you? And you go, I'm female. And they go, oh my goodness, I didn't notice, come right in. It doesn't work that way. It's probably even more so that just in the interview, which is this very subjective process, does the interviewer, do you come across as a younger version of himself that might work sort of more against you. But at any rate, so I worry about all the kind of visible stuff, emphasizing all the things that people are doing to promote women and minorities or whatever, because then people are suspicious. Oh, maybe you just got your job because of that. So one time I got a recruitment letter from a high-tech company saying, we're particularly interested in you as a female thought leader, which was like, you know, I'm good enough for a real job. Why do you have to say that aloud? But at any rate, I wasn't interested anyway, so I didn't reply. But my fantasy reply was, thank you for your interest in me as a, quote, female thought leader, unquote. Although my credentials as a thought leader are impeccable, I must warn you I'm not that qualified as a female. I can't walk in heels, I have no clothing sense, and I'm not particularly decorative. You know, what aspects of being female are important to this job? But anyway, yeah, I mean, mostly there are difficulties, but I don't think it's strictly gender related. There are people who are just arrogant, obnoxious, credit stealing, undermining people. They do very well for themselves. They come across as incredible geniuses. And the people who are more modest get overlooked. So when someone says, we need someone who's an expert in data science, the aggressive people, me, I can do that. We need somebody in AI, I can do that. And you know, the executives think, wow, this is, you know, if instead they kind of looked, there's so many other people that will think, well, if I really deserved it, someone would have suggested it to me. So what you really should do is look for someone that you think has potential, but wouldn't think of volunteering, and say, would you consider volunteering to do this? And don't worry, these people will help you. If you run into any problems, we will make sure you succeed. So yeah, a great example of sort of bad culture was a group in a company that I was in, where the very aggressive people, everyone assumed were geniuses. They never did anything good technically. I have yet to find someone who acts that way that is any good technically. But if you ever asked a question, especially in public, one of these guys would say, if you don't know that already, you don't belong in this group. So, you know, can you imagine? So what I tell people is if somebody asks me a question that everybody knows, like what's a public key, I don't say, how can you not know that? I say, oh my goodness, it is the coolest thing ever, and I can't believe that I have the privilege of being the first person to introduce you to that. Now, another piece of that is that once you get to be kind of senior, you think, I'm supposed to know everything. Well, if you actually believe you know everything, it's time to retire. You're dangerous. And if you really want to be a role model, you should be the first person to ask naive questions, to show you're perfectly comfortable admitting that you don't know everything, that it's safe to ask questions, and so forth. So there's a whole bunch of things about corporate culture that I feel quite passionately about, and those are some of them.
I love your observation about asking questions. That's something definitely all of us can take away from this conversation. We have a lot of students in the audience, and I'm wondering if you might have some bits of advice for them.
Okay, well, when I went back to graduate school as a grown-up, rather than as a child, I discovered some secrets. Like when you get a problem set, start on it as soon as you get it, not in a panic the night before. Now, as it turns out, all the other grad students knew that I was this goody-goody that would have done all the problems before it was due. And so towards the end, they would start asking me for help on these things, which I sort of resented, but I also love teaching. Another thing is if the professor is droning on, ask a question. They'll really appreciate it. When I was a child, I assumed everyone else is following, and I'll just waste the class's time or something. But later on, often I would know what the teacher was trying to say, but I also knew that most of the class was probably lost. So I would purposely ask a question to kind of focus the stuff. And there was one professor who really was not a very good teacher. And I would ask a lot of questions to keep it focused. And one time I was just too tired. And so the professor was noticing, this sea of blank faces. And then he said, Radia, would you ask a question? So, yeah. So ask questions. Also, when I, first time around, when I would get a test, I would spend the first 15 minutes wasting time madly in a panic, leafing through the questions, because I thought the professor was trying to trick me or something. But later on, I realized how hard it was to come up with questions, and I also realized if you're doing the homework and you're understanding the class, you'll do just fine on those. And one other piece of advice. When I first, my first paper that I tried to publish, I was looking at the routing algorithm in the ARPANET, and I realized it was unstable. Injecting just a few bad packets would bring the network back down forever. Now that's okay with your PC. You just reboot your PC. But you can't reboot a network. The way they do with networks is they figure out what's going on by sending messages on the network to figure out what's going on, and they fix it by sending messages on the network. So if the network is broken, what do you do? And so my paper was networks have to be way more reliable than like a PC. And here is the bug in the ARPANET algorithm. And here is how to design an algorithm like that that will be self-stabilizing, meaning once you get rid of whoever's injecting bad messages, the network should return to normal operation. So I got 2 reviews. I was not in academia at that point, and so I got 2 reviews, one which said it was a very good paper, and the other one, which, although the reviewer was anonymous, I realized it had to be the guy who designed the ARPANET routing algorithm who was feeling defensive. And so on a scale of 1 to 10, straight ones all across, really angry review. And all the ones said, it wasn't original, it wasn't correct, it was badly written, and the author was ugly, or whatever. And it was like, hey, you stole my wrong ideas or something. I don't know how it can be both not original and whatever, and incorrect. So I was very discouraged, and I figured any routing paper would get sent to this guy because there were so few people in that field at that point. But I was just lucky. The other reviewer must have been Professor Misha Schwartz from Columbia, who I only got the privilege of meeting about 10 years ago. He got in touch with me and he said, you wrote this paper and I'm using it in my class. Can you give me a proper bibliographic reference? And I said, it was rejected. And he said, yeah, that happens all the time. Don't worry about it. Would you like it published in my journal, which was a much more prestigious place than that conference I had. So you have to tell students that it's almost random whether your papers get accepted or not. Look at the reviewer's comments, and if they can help you improve your paper, do that. But it's, and academia, it's unfortunate that it takes months to find out whether your paper got accepted or not, and you can only submit it to one place. And I'm always worried that I'll submit a paper which the reviewers will say, oh, no, no, but then it will spark something in them that will make them reinvent what was in the paper, and I'm sure that must happen too. So yeah, you just, oh, and so I tell professors, don't just have your students read what you think are good papers. Have them read horrible papers that were published in highly prestigious venues, and really groundbreaking papers along with the reviews from the first 4 times they were rejected. So, yeah.
Thank you for those pieces of advice. Rajiv is going to come to the front, and I hope folks have some good questions out there in the audience.
Thank you. Wasn't that a fascinating conversation? There is an opportunity for you to ask questions. If you raise your hand, I'll come close to you and give you the microphone.
And don't be afraid, you can ask anything.
There it is. Don't be bashful.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes, so did you meet David Cutler?
Oh, Dave Cutler?
Yeah. If it's anything.
I sort of knew of him, but he was, I think, in California, right?
Well, he was up here in the 90s because I worked in a group that he chaired.
Yeah, I didn't really know him well.
Okay, so just make a background. David Cutler was Windows and the architect. So just
Okay.
happens to know him, so this is why I'm asking.
Yeah.
Yes.
Lead by steps.
Thank you for all that you shared. It was quite amazing. Your thesis was on Byzantine faults, and I had a question on that. So, and part of this is a little bit of my opinion, but Byzantine faults are often not emphasized in industry, or are sometimes dismissed as overly complex or impractical to address. Why is this the case, and under what circumstances should industry consider their approach to Byzantine fault tolerance?
Right, so Byzantine faults, a regular fault is where something's working perfectly and then it halts. A Byzantine fault is where, like, a trusted insider starts acting badly, and it might be because they're purposely malicious or have a hardware fault or something like that. And so so like in distributed systems, people often say, oh, well, we'll have like 5 servers, and if one goes down, just immediately crashes, the system will still work. But they don't think about that case, the Byzantine fault, where somebody is still operating, but it's giving wrong things. And that is something that I like to look at. And yeah, I think that industry doesn't do enough of looking at that. Yeah.
So I do have one use case. So the use case is an autonomous car, which they're all over the place right now. So your autonomous car is driving at whatever the speed limit is, 50, 60 miles an hour, and it has lots of computers, lots of sensors, measuring things, comparing results, and in some cases, they're either checking or not checking whether the result is valid or if the device itself is functioning correctly. And so this is a concern, in a sense, in the industry, that you have a lot of autonomy on the road, and sometimes the perception you get is, well, Byzantine faults are irrelevant, or it's just too complicated to deal with it in terms of this, all of the complexity in an autonomous vehicle.
Right, yeah, I mean, you have to consider Byzantine faults, and if the industry is not doing enough of it, they really should. Actually, another sort of anecdote about that. So I told you about let's see, what was I? Oh, right. So I told you about my paper about here's the ARPANET, the flaw in the ARPANET algorithm. And so one time, many years later, someone said, oh, Radia, you do protocols, and I do this protocol proof of correctness thing. So there was a whole fad for a while with all these papers about protocol proof of correctness things, which I found them all really boring. So at any rate, I said, well, have you proven anything real with it, or is it just, you know, they all proved the alternating bit protocol where you send a 0, then a 1, then a 0, then a 1, which I'm sure is correct. It's been proven correct in millions of papers. But he said, oh yeah, he proved the ARPANET algorithm for distributing link state information is correct. And I said, but that isn't correct. And he said, yes, it is. I proved it was correct. And I said, but if you inject 3 bad messages into the network will be down forever. And he said, well, if you put bad data in, what do you expect? So, you know, and that thing in the ARPANET actually happened, where there was kind of a sick router that was about to die. And so in its dying breath, it said, I curse you, O world, and sort of generated a few bad messages, which unfortunately were just of the right type. And so the bad router was no longer connected to the network, but it had, yeah, you really do have to worry about bad things happening. Yeah.
Good evening, Radia. Good to see you. And thanks for all of the kind thoughts and words that you shared with us tonight. I guess I have a question more of a human nature point of view. So how, so you expressed that you were a mother, not just the internet, kids too. Share how you approached balancing work and or education and research and motherhood.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't remember it ever really being hard, but I visit friends who have like a toddler, and I'm exhausted. The toddler is just screaming constantly for no good reason, running around, figuring out ways to kill themselves, you know, pulling tablecloths down and whatever. And I can't imagine how I survived that, but I must have. But yeah, there were all sorts of, you know, I'm glad that I had kids, because my second kid is our co-author on the 3rd edition of our book. He works at NIST in the cryptography group, and I would not have had the nerve to tackle quantum if it weren't for him. Now, people have different skills. We didn't let him write any of the book because he can't talk to mortals, but he understands, you know, the stuff. And then when we try to ask him to explain, you know, he just talks on and on and on, and you know, and occasionally he'll sigh, and I can imagine him thinking, I used to think my mom was smart. But, yeah. Oh, I guess I could tell. When I went back to graduate school, my daughter was 6, and she was all excited about it. She had no idea what it meant, but she was all excited I was going to graduate school. So she was on a playground in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and she was playing with another little girl that she found. And she said to the other little girl, my mommy's going to get a PhD from MIT. And the other little girl said, my mommy already has one. She had a PhD in chemistry, and we got to be friends. But yeah, something else, I knew everything about bringing up kids until I had kids. And I knew the way they turned out was because of how you brought them up. So my first kid was my daughter, who's just incredibly bossy, incredibly opinionated, a real daredevil. If you took your eyes off her for a second, you'd be going to the emergency room. She's a pain in the neck, but I admired her spirit, and I was feeling secretly superior to the parents of shy kids. Well, 3 years later, I got the wimpiest kid on the planet, which was my son. He never went on swings or slides. He liked to go to playgrounds, but just to sit next to me and watch the other children play, which kind of broke my heart. Anyway, when she was 12 and he was 9, I was giving her the lecture about drugs, and I didn't realize he was listening, but it was fine. And I was telling her, I know you'll be really curious, but you're buying it from criminals. You have no idea what you're getting. Even if you get the right stuff, some people's bodies react badly to cocaine or whatever. And in my vast knowledge of drugs, you know, but at any rate, my son looked up at me with his sweet, innocent 9-year-old eyes, and he said, "You don't have to worry about me, Mommy. I don't even try things that are safe."
Well, we have time for one more question.
What are some tips or advice do you have for students who are interested in a career in either networking or network security?
I could be obnoxious and say, read our book. But yeah, I think it's a great school, a great career path. These days, unfortunately, everyone wants AI. So I'm not sure that hiring, you know, that the personnel departments realize that there's other important things. But yeah, I think it's a fascinating field where there's a lot of insight that people don't necessarily have because they're more just interested in configuring Cisco routers. But having the ability to kind of be able to design new distributed systems and also the security stuff is extremely important, and I hope there are jobs there. Yeah.
Very good. Sorry that time, we can't stop that. And please join me in thanking again our visitor. Thank my fellow dean, Jennifer McCallum. I'd also like to thank Dr. Irina Atov for bringing Radia to campus. You teach for us, you're on the STEM Advisory Board. Thank you for doing that. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't thank our fabulous support staff who have worked with my trusted assistant, Amy Blondie. I'm looking for, who am I?
Lacey.
Okay, Lacey, you're Marcom in STEM. And I think my communications specialist, Riley Oval, is probably outside. This has been a wonderful event. I thank you for being with us, sharing these fascinating insights. I invite all of you to join us for a reception in the collaboratory. But before we do that, we'd like to acknowledge or thank in a simple way. I have one is for you. There's a small bag of swag. Your home probably doesn't hold up yet.
Thank you. I should tell people what it is.
And Irina has a...
Yes. Oh, thank you. Oh my gosh.
Thank you.